About a week before Christmas '97, we were back at Disney for Christmas activities. We spent 2 nights at the Marriott. We loved our room on the 24th floor. One great view. We did a lot of running around Disney property. At one point, we took the boat to Epcot and waited to see the candlelight procession. Pat Morita of Happy Days and Karate Kid fame was the narrator. It was an excellent program. The combined choral groups and orchestra did a great job. The program by itself was worth the trip. December 31st. At this point, I have to recognize the achievement of Alicia Noto, who would become our daughter-in-law, and, as far as I know, Paul's first and only love. She has always been a sweet and lovely young woman, hard-working, who was devoted to family and her church. Through perseverance and application, she was to graduate from Eastern Nazarene College with a degree in primary education. For several years, not being one to accept idleness, found various activities to keep her busy, including babysitting and particularly serving as a substitute teacher after finally getting her teaching certificate. Eventually, she would land a full-time position with the Hanover school system. Even after they would eventually move to Pocasset on the Cape, she would commute to her Hanover job. This also allowed her to remain closer to her mom and dad in Rockland. As I look back over the past year, we were doing somewhat better than we had the year previously. I was working more. We want to save enough to be able to have a good time when Paul Jr. gets married in July and to be able to buy him a nice wedding gift. Jen called on January 1st of '98 from Southbridge. Louise had both Jen and Jared staying with her. Jen said that they had a great time in Paris, except that at one time or another, either she or MJ were sick. Nothing serious, mostly from exhaustion, I think. MJ arrived in Paris a day later than Jen, and Jen was really relieved to meet her. They hit most of the popular tourist spots. They didn't actually eat out much. They made their own meals in the room. They ate baguettes every morning, apparently. The end of January. Called my mother and father. My father's keeping busy cleaning all those golf balls he's collected at Package Hog, and my mother says she keeps busy rearranging things down in the cellar. They really go out, though my father did mention that they do go to Whalen Park inside flea market every week or two just to get out. The job at MI was not as much fun as the last project. It was interesting to read all those papers written by 8th graders, mostly 13-year-olds. I commented to my team leader, a soft-spoken older lady, Wanda, about how cynical and aggressive the writing seemed to be. At this age, our generation never concerned themselves with the dress code, which was the subject of these papers. The writing also shows the degree of cynicism that I know was absent when I was that age. Wanda responded that she didn't think that what they were writing wasn't necessarily an accurate reflection of what they really felt. I didn't disagree with her, but I think she was being a little naive. On February 16th, we spoke to our daughter, who was in a talkative mood. She's tired of studying, but is enjoying herself socially. She says she just lost the motivation and doesn't really know where to direct her efforts now. She's homesick from Massachusetts. She says she's too far away from family who might need her at some point. It's also important that in time, we, her mother and father, be close at hand as well. April 25th. Spoke to both kids. Jennifer's finishing up her several weeks of classes and teaching. Paul and Alicia found a bedroom set that would be our wedding gift to them for roughly around $2,000. The kids have been working on the house, painting ceilings and wallpapering their house on Mark Street in Rockland. June 7th, we loved our new apartment at Coco Cay. It was spacious and clean with a pool in the courtyard that I use quite a bit. June 30th, Paul, Jen, and Alicia met us at the airport gate. As we walked to the parking garage, the kids told us that they had a little accident. Paul rear-ended the Toyota Camry with his truck, specifically the plow hitch at the front of the truck. It tore up the trunk of the car pretty badly, but little other damage. Alicia had stopped at a stop sign and then started to turn across the intersection of Rockland. She stopped suddenly, and Paul, traveling maybe a little bit too close, bumped into her. It was the first time I'd seen the house on Mark Street that they would be purchasing from the grandfather's estate. They've done a lot of work on it. They pulled up the carpeting in the dining room area of the kitchen, the living room, and one of the bedrooms. To their surprise, hardwood floors were revealed, which they sanded and polished. They also removed a couple of layers of wallpaper in those rooms, touched them up, and painted them a lavender white color. The kids would be renting the house for a while, but expected to buy it within a year for about $120,000. It was assessed at $126,000. The appliances were older, and there was a good deal of clutter, but they were putting in a lot of work. There was also an adjacent two-car garage. July 4th, the wedding. The culmination of a year and a half of planning finally arrived, though the minister made the point during the service that Alicia had been planning it for a lot longer. Alicia actually came to the house to pick Jen up and leave Paul the car keys. Since she didn't want Paul to see her, he went to the bedroom. They spoke through the door. Paul has a habit, he says he got it from me, of having people put the keys into his hand. So he had to open the door a crack and get the keys from her. Jen and I had to take the truck to the church. My parents and Dee were waiting in front of the church. It was fairly warm and they were getting a little uncomfortable. When the contingent from Southbridge arrived, 7 people in Mark's van, including Louise. I walked my mom to the church to the elevators so she wouldn't have to walk the stairs. On the walk down the aisle, Jan kissed her escort as she was seated. When Angela's son Mark tried to kiss his mom, she had already started to sit, and all we got was air, which brought a laugh from everyone. Angela heard all the laughter, and when she discovered what happened, she blew her son a kiss. The music was provided by an older gentleman, a violin soloist. It was different, but it was really nice. The church was nearly full by the time the ceremony started. The minister, Paul, and Tommy entered from the right. Jared and his escort were followed by Jennifer, who looked very lovely, with her hair done up. Apparently it took 4 or 5 tries to get it right because it was so fine. She counted the bobby pins later and it came to 40. Paul looked very poised but somewhat nervous. Alicia and her dad made their entrance and she looked radiant and lovely. I was watching Paul, and the only noticeable sign of nervousness was an occasional uncurling of the fingers of his right hand. The ceremony itself was lovely and much different from a Catholic one, simpler and more focused on the couple. The minister spoke about the relationship that Paul and Alicia have had over the past 7 years, and how they had been much involved in the format and symbolism of the ceremony. They wanted it to be very Christian, and I think that part was fulfilled nicely. The minister read several biblical passages, but focused on how God had said, after the creation of man and woman, that it was a very good thing. He also indicated that it was Paul's responsibility as the man to be willing to lay down his life for his wife. To Alicia, he pronounced that she would be subservient to her husband. The minister was playful at times, in keeping with a lighter atmosphere overall. He recited a couple of humorous stories. I like the one about a youngster who, when discussing a religious matter with his father, somehow the subject of the number of wives a man should have came up, and the young person said that a man should have 16 wives. Father asked, "How could that be?" The son answered, 4 richer, 4 poorer, 4 better, 4 worse. There was the oral commitment to one another. Paul stumbled just a bit. The exchange of rings followed, a profound moment. Finally, the kiss, and the minister introduced the new married couple to the congregation. It was when I saw Paul with the ring on his finger that it really hit me. It seemed like yesterday that Jan and I were at the altar exchanging our own vows. And not that long ago, when the black-haired little infant that was our son was born, Here he was, standing tall and married. My mom was very impressed with the service, saying as much to me. Jen said that Grandma's eyes were glued to the two of them. I'm not sure what Louise was feeling. She sat next to me in the second row, but I couldn't determine what her feelings were. She didn't volunteer much. She may have been a little disappointed that this was not a Catholic church. After we got back to Tampa, Louise called to say that she thought everything went wonderfully. She really liked the minister. Then it was off to the reception at Barker's Tavern in Scituate. As common in modern weddings, the picture taking went a bit long, but on the other hand, people had a chance to socialize, and the kids were able to get some pictures at the lighthouse in Scituate Harbor. Jack and Marie, Justin and Kristen were there. We seated them at the same table with George and Denise, since both women were teachers and Jack and George were sci-fi fans. Jan and I circulated as much as possible. The married couple didn't, as is the usual custom. Paul didn't want to. Jan and I thought that they should have. When the kids arrived, there was a bit more picture taking, but finally the wedding party was formed up to march to the hall. Paul and Alicia were ushered in to the music of the 1812 overture. It was untraditional, but very appropriate, I think. There was a DJ instead of a band, which I thought was fine. As the time progressed, the music got progressively louder, but there were always people on the dance floor. I did my share of dancing, even several fast ones. I held up surprisingly well, though I'm not sure how dumb I looked, especially doing the twists. Alicia did the dance with her dad, and there were tears, of course. But I don't think a wedding would be complete without this very touching moment. They also played the matching song for the mother of the groom for Jan and Paul. Jan said that there were so many pictures being taken that she didn't have a chance to think much about that moment or cry. They did an anniversary dance. We had to coax my parents onto the dance floor. My mother resisted and almost got angry with me, but I relented. The DJ kept asking couples to leave the floor based on the length of marriage. By the time they got to 25 years, there were only a handful of couples left, including us. They noted that our anniversary had been on July 1st. Eventually, only my parents were left, and it was easy to tell that they were both delighted by the attention. 52 years married. Finally, it was time for the newly married couple to begin their honeymoon, around 5 o'clock. The gray Camry was waiting at the entrance. 2 dirt bikes on the roof. The car was covered with streamers. I can only imagine the mixture of feelings of the kids: relief, anticipation, excitement. The morning began with Jen venting about our leaving. She gave all kinds of reasons of why it was selfish of us to leave our family and just move. Jan got upset. Will Jen never accept the reality? The day we flew back to Tampa, Jen wasn't in a much better mood. She wouldn't get out of the bed to see us off. She said it would be too unsettling for her. July 6th. Jan spoke to Jen for about 40 minutes or so. She's still piling on the guilt. Now she's saying that we shouldn't have left so soon. Janet about lost all patience, but she's still trying to be nice as she can despite the attacks. July 13th. Jen sent an email yesterday saying that she had gone shopping for Paul and Alicia to help stock the shelves before they return. She had no problem spending the $100 we had given her for that purpose. The tone of her message was a lot more relaxed now that she's got both the job and the new apartment squared away. In late August, we spent a 3-day weekend in celebration of Jan's 50th birthday at Lido Beach near Sarasota. We checked into the Radisson Motel right on the beach. On Saturday evening, we attended a musical play that Jan really wanted to see, and which seemed intriguing to me as well. Elizabeth of Russia. The woman had a wonderful voice. We thoroughly enjoyed the music. During one portion of the show, a solo violinist played a tune that was absolutely beautiful. Supposedly, the violin was a Stradivarius. Following the solo, a troupe of dancers performed a wonderful Russian folk dance. The whole show was a fun experience. It lasted from about 7:30 to almost 10:30. September 27th. Jen called last night and again this morning. She's given her notice at her job. The owner had a verbal duel with Ingrid, Jen's only friend there. Then she gave her notice. He tried to argue and cajole Jen into rethinking her resignation. He wouldn't admit that he was doing anything wrong. She feels very uncomfortable there now, but is relieved that she doesn't have to stay. At the end of September, we volunteered for another of Air Canada's dream flights. On October 8, 98, flying back to Mass, Ann met us at Logan. Ann is a sweetheart, kind and generous. Apparently they're remortgaging the house again to buy a business, a bait shop for Frank. They wanted to buy the business that Frank worked for over a 3-year period. They're not buying the property, just the inventory. Frank showed me his new boat, a 17-foot fishing boat. Very nice with lots of extras, 2 auxiliary trolling motors, 1 electric, a fish finder, a radio, a full canvas cabin top. He paid $5,000 for it used. We met Jen at the commuter rail station in Cambridge. This was the last day at the job. She had given her notice 2 weeks ago. Her boss waited until the end of the day and then called her into the office. Apparently he wanted to tell her off, as he had the other woman who quit with Jen 2 weeks previously. Jen walked into the office but said there was no reason to have any conversation since she had fulfilled her notice period. When he insisted that he wanted to talk to her, she insisted on leaving the door open so the other people in the office could hear. That must have undermined his intention, but he did accuse her of not being dedicated enough because she wouldn't stay after hours to do work. Jen put up with this because he was still holding her last check. I think she showed a great poise and maturity in handling it the way she did. She had a second interview at Harvard with a woman named Mimi. Jen characterized the interview as more of an interrogation. There were questions about how she might conduct a research assignment on determining who and how to interview professional people. She would be having an interview with Howard Gardner himself. During our stay, we met with Ray and Anita Varon. We learned a funny story about Fiore, Vic's brother. He had his mouth taped in the 5th grade for talking. That was kind of hard to believe about Fiore. Anita also related that Vic was her favorite brother because he always sided with her over their father, who was a very conservative about her virtue. Fiore was very generous to her with money. She didn't have much nice to say about Benny, who was the most like their father. Jen called to tell us about her interview with Howard Gardner. I left a phone message on her machine about an article in the current Newsweek magazine about Gardner's theory on multiple intelligence. It also contained some criticism of his work and theory. I thought it would help her by giving a little background information on him. She wasn't able to read the piece before her interview, though. Visited my parents. During the afternoon and evening, we talked about all the usual things, health, activities, relatives, etc. My dad is still prowling the golf course for wayward golf balls and sells his various wares at the flea market. He's still collecting golf clubs. He showed us a gold-plated one he bought for a couple of dollars. He cooked up a potpourri of veggies, including a microwave assortment of frozen vegetables, sweet potato, focaccia bread pizza. He's comical as he bounces around the kitchen. He passed around dishes like he was dealing cards. Some of them bounced on the tile table, startling Dee and Jan. Even with his hearing difficulties, he's a lot more sociable at this stage of life. During a card game at Paul and Alicia's, we spoke some about Louise's problems. I mentioned that the longer one stayed there, the more she asked them to do. That's no problem in itself. I don't mind helping as much as I can. But after a while, it gets to the point where you begin to feel like a personal servant. She doesn't even want to get off the couch. Jen admitted that this was a reason that she didn't go to Southbridge more often. She hardly gets in the door before Louise puts her to work doing something. One day, after a hard week at work and a long drive, her sister Anne made an effort to come to see her and was greeted upon opening the door with a request to set the table for a meal. Anne got so upset that she started to cry. and said that she needed at least some time to rest. Louise didn't even apologize, just said that she could do it later. We saw many relatives and friends while we were in the area. We spent the last few days with Jennifer. She accompanied us to Logan and sat with us while we had a cup of coffee, which she doesn't drink. We thanked her for all that she had done for us. I explained that we were grateful that she was able to spend as much time with us as she did, and that it was lucky for us that she was between jobs. I'm really glad that I was able to reacquaint myself with Jennifer. We've grown apart over the last several years. I'd come to know her again as a warm, generous young woman with deeply held convictions. She often showed signs of affection to her mom and me. I'm very proud of her. Talked to Paul on the phone. He lobbed a minor bomb by saying that while his job was okay, he was getting bored and wanted more challenge. He's been looking at the classifieds to see what's in the market. Says he wants to get some kind of a technical degree. I said that while I was sure he could do it, it was going to be a long haul. He hasn't yet taken any college courses, so I suggested he might take a few local offerings to test the waters. The idea totally surprised Jan and me. He's always said he was entirely happy with his situation. I told him that his urge to change was kind of a DiBara trait. I didn't say anything discouraging for fear that he might think I was lacking confidence in him, which couldn't be further from the truth. On November 18th, a fellow in the writing room, adjacent to ours at MI, died of a heart attack at his seat. He was given CPR, but that wasn't enough to save him. He was in his mid-70s. After working at MI for 3 weeks, checks were handed out. For 2 weeks, I netted about $500. So far this year, I've managed to earn just over $3,000. Jan will earn about $24,000. That's something anyway. December 1st. I was asked by the room supervisor, Holly, if I wanted to be a reader in the next rangefinder project. She volunteered that it was much the same kind of math that we were doing. I said I was interested. Only about 22 of the 60 people in the math group were asked, so I guess I'm regarded as a good scorer. December 21st. After returning from a cruise, the Royal Caribbean Sovereign of the Seas, Bahamas, I've been sicker than I've been since before moving to Florida. The symptoms began on a 6-hour ride back to St. Pete. By the time we got home around 5, I was totally congested and achy. I was in bed before 7. Then I got hit by the chills alternating with fever. The only thing I managed to escape was the intestinal problem, thank heavens. Jan was my angel of mercy. December 24th. A package arrived at the door yesterday from Paul. It was a joint gift from Paul and Jen. Paul called me to see if I had received it and asked if I was going to open it right then. I said I'd rather be surprised, but when Jan came home in the afternoon, she wanted to open it, so we did. It was a new VCR. Our old one had broke. The Measurement Inc. job kept me busy during the day. Effective January 1st, readers' pay would be going up by $1 to $8.75 an hour. Better, but still about $1 short of what we should get for the credentials that they require to do the job. January 10th, 99. Spoke to Paul. He told us a couple of good ones. Alicia was opening a jar of pasta sauce when the jar slipped and dropped to the floor. He described the result as a sauce bomb. There was sauce on the floor, the walls, and even the ceiling. Then he mentioned Alicia's attempt to make gravy one night. She called Paul over because it wasn't coming out right. She had added 2 cups of flour instead of 2 tablespoons. January 30. I was walking with Jan to work, and we stopped at a garage sale at a house about halfway there. We haven't gone to many of the yard sales lately, but it was a pretty lucky morning for me. They didn't have much to offer, but what they did have was priced right. I walked into the garage where they seemed to have some computer items for sale. I noticed an Apple PowerBook 180 laptop, a 1993 vintage, black and white monitor. The sign stated that all the things that came with it, and it was priced at about $15. At first I thought they must have meant that the carrying case was $15. Jan asked the girl if the price for everything was $15, and she said it was. The girl booted up the computer to show that it worked. She admitted that the battery was dead, and needed to be replaced, which means it really can only be used with the AC adapter. For $15, I was getting a computer that, if bought from a reseller, would cost maybe $400. New 5 or 6 years previous, it would have cost some $2,000. February 6th, Diane called to tell us that my Aunt Charlotte had died in the hospital on Thursday and that my Uncle Earl shot himself to death that morning. She was 76, he was 80. This is the second suicide in my mom's family. My cousin Greg drugged himself to death within a year of my Aunt Doris, his mother's, death. The fact that my uncle killed himself doesn't surprise me. He was always very independent and headstrong. He was a character, strong-willed and stubborn. I recall my aunt devoted to my uncle. I don't even remember him having a regular job, but he was a hard worker and self-educated. For a long time, he operated a wood-cutting lumber business on his property, complete with sawmill. They also had extensive gardens that they cultivated for their own food and to sell. I spoke to my mother. She read in the paper the previous night, or in the morning, about my Aunt Charlotte's death at St. Vincent's Hospital, where Jan worked as a pharmacy tech just after we got married. When she called in the morning to talk to my uncle, a police officer answered. When she said that she was the sister, he handed the phone off to another officer. He told her that my uncle wasn't feeling well. My mother decided to drive to the home. When they got out of the car, they were met by an officer who admitted what had happened and told her it wouldn't be appropriate to go into the house, which he described as a mess. It was there that she got an explanation of what they think happened. She sounded all right on the phone. She said that they had run into my aunt and uncle a little over a week previous, and they seemed happy. My aunt mentioned to my mother that she should explain to me that because of her failing eyesight, she didn't send a response to the letter and card that I sent for Christmas. Apparently, they worked out a system where my uncle would read things to her and she would spell out the words he didn't know. Jan is pretty upset with the news. She feels for how my uncle must have felt losing my aunt so quickly. They were married for about 60 years. My uncle left all his property to his next-door neighbor, who I believe had formed a friendship with him. My uncle once told me that the farm would someday belong to me. Any of the siblings could have contested the will, but none did. If that's what he wanted, so be it. That was my Uncle Earl. March 15th, Jen finally called. She talked for almost an hour. She seems that she doesn't really like her job that much. It's boring. She wants to be able to do something that gives her some sense of fulfillment and accomplishment. Sounds familiar. It's got to be in the genes. We're very glad to hear from her, but she does 90% of the talking and decides the topic of conversation. She's become so self-assured that she's forgotten that while people want to hear what you have to say, they also need to feel that you value what they have to say. She doesn't suffer boredom easily, nor topics that she's not interested in. And I still believe that there's something about me that makes her uncomfortable. I don't know what it is. I think Jan is exasperated with me. She's frustrated about what to do about vacation. It seems that nothing she can suggest gets me excited. I've explained, and she understands, that I like the idea of doing things, but I don't like the hassle of going and coming, specifically the crowds and the unforeseen stresses. In March of '99, Jen was here for a 4-day visit. It was great to have her here again. I'm not sure we kept her busy enough. Jan took her day off because of an ear infection, so she wasn't her usual perky self. During Jen's time here, we did have some interesting conversations. She spoke about what she wants to do in the future. She doesn't want to tie herself down to one area of study. She can think of no specialty that attracts her so intensely that she's willing to devote all her time and energies to it. Like me, she's much of a generalist. April 16th, to Fort Myers for a job interview at the Canterbury School. During the course of the day, I met with like 10 different people, from their computer teacher to the headmaster. It was a fascinating lesson in organizational dynamics. I treated it more like a consulting survey than an interview. There was a great deal of animosity directed against the current technological director of 4 years. He was maybe in his 30s. Most people did give him credit for designing and implementing the current infrastructure of network, school and office hardware and software, and the school's website. But he wasn't a people person and lacked organizational skills. The most striking thing I observed was how the school's administrative functions were being carried out using PCs on a LAN. There is no campus mainframe. I congratulated them on the accomplishment, but I also said that based on my discussions, most of the critical processes were not being carried out efficiently. I explained things were fragmented, with much software being underutilized. Much could be done to improve the system and make it more responsive and effective. They seemed to be responsive to my views and occasionally applauded some of my insights. The headmaster seemed to be very open with me and made it sound like I seemed to be what they were looking for. He mentioned that the position paid in the mid-40s and their retirement plan was Tia Kref. By the time I left, I felt pretty good. On April 22nd, I got a call from the headmaster of the school. He was in Boston on a visit to a school he'll be working at after he leaves Canterbury. He said that I am one of the 2 remaining candidates for the position. He said that people at the school had been very impressed by me, he in particular. He did want to discuss another employment possibility with me. While emphasizing that it would not diminish my candidacy for the tech position, he wanted to know if I would consider a position that would involve teaching and building a new computer curriculum, if it was created in conjunction with the tech position. I said I would. I reminded him that I had taught half-time at Curry and created the computer curriculum for the college. Of the 2 positions, I prefer the teaching and curriculum development situation. It would be nice to let someone else deal with the hardware aspect of the job, although I would have taken it if it had been offered. April 29th. MI statistics passed out today. My average was considered in the high reader category. Okay, May 11th, Louise told Jan that an eye doctor told her that she's in the beginning stages of macular degeneration. Louise immediately felt that she was going to go blind very soon. The doctor told her that was not an immediate concern, but that she probably shouldn't have an operation to remove the cataracts from her eyes, since that sometimes speeds up the process. Though I haven't mentioned most of the cruises we went on since the horizon, I want to mention the river cruise we took in mid-May out of New Orleans. The River Explorer was striking, white with a blue trim. I was surprised at the length of the vessel. It's composed of 2 barges. A single 300-foot commercial barge can carry the equivalent of 58 trailer trucks, along with a tug, Miss Nary, that pushes from the rear. The connected vessels extend some 730 feet from the bow to the stern. The rear or aft barge contains 2 levels of cabins. The upper cabins have porches. The very top of the barge contains the sky deck with the covered open area and an open air bar and refreshments area. The front forward barge contains the dining area, the lobby, Sprague Hall, which extends the length of 2 interior levels, the library, a couple of lounge areas, the chart house, a windowed room which provides guests with an unobstructed view of the area in front of the barge, even piped-in audio of the pilot's communication, and on the top, the pilot's cabin from which he commands the barge. We had a wonderful time and took some great excursions during our week that we spent in Mississippi. To summarize, Jan decided she liked river barging better than cruising, and I tend to agree. We love the spacious cabins with the large windows and only a few feet above the waterline. Pulling the blinds back in the morning to view the muddy river and the shore sights was very nice. Then there were the views from the sky deck or the chart room. And of course, there's an opportunity to meet new and interesting people. I love the chance to lounge on the sky deck amid the river breezes and read or write on my laptop. The only disruption, an occasional toot from another boat or a call to a meal. May 29th, just before leaving work at MI, one day several of us were talking when my team leader, Bill, mentioned filling out evaluations for team members. He said that he wished all the evaluations could be as easy to fill out as mine. dependable, confident, fast, or something along those lines. It doesn't take much. Just concentrate and try to keep it interesting. Most folks put too much effort into each question, and to break up the monotony, they take extended breaks or joke around with the folks next to them. Bill has mentioned to Jim, my old team leader, that I was too focused, that I never seemed to take a break. I like to work fairly fast because the time seems to go by faster. June 5th, back in Massachusetts, we headed out to Worcester. Paul drives pretty fast, which makes me anxious, but I refuse to be a backseat driver. Both parents are working in the backyard. My mother was cleaning off a picnic table, and my dad was washing off an old golf bag he must have picked up at a flea market or yard sale. I called Wally, my cousin, just after I arrived. He wanted to drop in and say hello while we were there. He came down within a half an hour. He got a heartfelt welcome from my mother, especially since he hadn't seen them for years. I got a big hug, and there was quite a bit of catching up. We spoke together for about an hour, especially about what kind of subject we both liked to teach at college. It seems we both enjoyed teaching topics that had to do with people learning about themselves and how to deal with others. He told us about his daughters. Amy is going to school in San Francisco and has also learned how to tap dance and surf. Carrie is attending Worcester State part-time. He sometimes feels bad about having been raised to deal with others so secretively, blaming part of it on his religious upbringing. The kids had some good conversation with their grandparents. Jen even asked my father how he and Grandma met. He told her that while he was in the service, he got a letter from someone he didn't know, Mom, telling him about his uncle and his sister who were going out together. My father was wondering why the heck he was getting a letter from this girl. She must have been around 16 at the time. He was 5 years older. When I noticed that my uncle and my aunt's car was next door, I decided to go over and see them. I wanted to give them the family tree update sheet that I had made. I came around the corner of the house. It was sitting next to the side door stairs in the shade, and I said, hi there. My aunt practically jumped out of her chair and exclaimed, "Oh!" Curiously, she was most excited to see me and gave me a hug. I gave my uncle a hug. After about 15 minutes, I said I had to leave, and she said, "Oh, I have to give you another hug." This is the same woman who hardly spoke to me when I was a kid. Finally, it was time to leave and head up to see Jack and Marie in Leominster. My mother told the kids to visit soon and not to wait until we came to visit. I think Paul made the trip in record time. Jack and Marie would be taking an Alaska cruise on the 12th of July. It would be their first cruise. Jared's party on Sunday was attended by some 46 people, even without the Southbridge folks. Jared was not the most gracious of hosts, spending 90% of the time in the house playing computer games. Later in the afternoon, Jen went in and asked Jared to pass out the graduation cake and thank people for coming, which he did. Ann told Jan that Jared would not have listened to her. Jen filled in his hostess, running around, greeting people, and seeing that the older people didn't need anything. On August 11th, 1999, got a call from Canterbury School. They wanted to know if I was interested in the full-time faculty curriculum development job at the school. I was runner-up for the tech job the previous April. She wanted to have me meet the chancellor the following Monday. I asked a little more about the position, but when it came to money, she couldn't give me a figure. The next day, I called the director of the upper school as requested. He wasn't immediately available and supposed to call me back within a few minutes, but didn't return the call till around 2:30. I didn't like his voice or his attitude. He also redefined the position from what I had been told. Neither could he quote a salary figure or even a range. He said I could call the headmaster in the next morning. I was fed up with the runaround and the evasion. I was beginning to wonder what the institutional dynamic was at the school. I had been bounced from one individual to another and decided not to waste any more time pursuing something I was ambivalent about anyway. It was though the left hand didn't know what the right hand was up to. Jan was very relieved about the decision. She didn't like the idea of being separated for several months. She's not that crazy about the area either. August 23rd. Paul called wanting some information on how to buy life insurance. We talked for about 20 minutes. I appreciated that he called me for advice. There are lots of folks he could have turned to. He's an especially personable guy. I'm proud of the kids. They are living life according to their own choices, and both are independent, but not in a selfish way. September 5th, called my mother to wish her a happy birthday, her 71st. Oh, I reminded her that the 2nd was her mother's birthday, born in 1895. She mentioned that her mother had died in 51. I said that was the year that we moved to the Rose Lane house. She remembered that her mother had visited the house once before she died, and my mother said that she was worried about her mother coming to the house on the bus. She had suffered a stroke sometime before that, and my mother was concerned that she wouldn't be careful crossing Route 20. Her mother got to the house and was all praises. "Oh, the house is beautiful," is what she said. On October 15th, spoke to Paul. He wanted to tell me he was accepting a job offer from a company called HLB, some kind of research company. He'll be field engineer and will even have assignments involving flights to different cities. The salary was supposed to be around $36,000. On October 19th, Jan said that 2 positions had opened at Logan Airport. We were quick to decide to apply and return to Massachusetts. Jan has always wanted an airport job. I can't understand why. The dramatic changes in activity wouldn't appeal to me, nor the prospect of abusive passengers. Jen sent me a little email saying that she was very sorry I wasn't coming with Mom. I responded with "I am" in the subject line. She called and asked me what I meant. I told her I was going to come after all. I also put in a line in the message proper that Mom had another little surprise to tell her about. When I wouldn't tell her, she said, "What, am I going to have a baby sister?" I told her I'd let Mom explain. October 21st, called Paul and broke the news to him. When Jan asked what he thought the news was, he had the same answer as Jen, that Jan was going to have a baby. He was very excited about our news, though. He warmly invited us to stay at his home for at least a few months. He's going to pull up the carpet and paint the walls. This will help take the sting out of some of the moving expenses and the job pressure for me. October 29th, back from Tampa, Florida, arrived in Southbridge about 7 o'clock in the evening after logging a total of 1,550 miles in 2 days of driving. We found Louise, Leona, and Lena at Lena's house. They all exploded with surprise on seeing Jan enter the door. November 31st, my mother mentioned that a few months ago she was cleaning a heating vent in the floor. She took the metal grid off but forgot to replace it. Later she was walking to her bedroom and she stepped into the vent with one whole leg dropping through the vent right into the cellar where my father was working. He heard a tremendous crashing sound and ran upstairs. Amazingly, my mother didn't break anything. She did get a good cut on her arm that required 4 stitches. To me, that was kind of amazing that she didn't hurt herself even more seriously. December 13th, after attending several non-productive job interviews, despite how promising they seemed, Jan found an ad in the Patriot Ledger for part-time instructors for Curry's Applied Computing program. I looked at it with mixed emotions. I would be going back if they would take me as part-timer in a program I created. The next day I met with Mary Ann and spent several hours with her. I've got the one course that's to start on January 21st on Excel. I got senior lecturer status, but not assistant professor, which would have paid at quarter time. When I got my contract, I was classified as senior lecturer plus. I was paid $3,400 for the one course. I would contribute to TIAA-CREF again. The college contributes $2 for every $1 I put in, up to 6% of my pay. December 25th, Christmas morning began just after 7. I got a 3-volume set on the Civil War from Paul and Alicia. Jen got a nightgown. Jen got me a pair of knitted gloves and her mom a nice handbag. We got Jen a pretty expensive cooking pot, specially fashioned for making soup. We got Paul and Alicia a comforter for the bed, and Jen got them a cover for the comforter. Around 2 o'clock, the Browns came over with more gifts for the kids, and there was another exchange. Jan was really getting flustered because the turkey she put in at 7 o'clock in the morning didn't seem to be cooking as fast as it was supposed to. The turkey came out really well, but in making the gravy, it spilled out of the bottom of the mixer that had been improperly assembled onto her pants and shoes. She was so upset she started crying. We did manage to salvage most of the gravy. December 31st, for the first time in some 20 years, we celebrated New Year's Eve on the town. We went to the VFW hall with Frank and Ann. We were among the youngest to attend the event. Jan and I must have danced about half the songs played by a DJ. When we got back home, we met the kids who had just arrived back from a party at Tommy's home. January 6, 2000. We were off to LA, having decided to make it a partial vacation, and I spent several days with Janet. On the 9th, we traveled to LA. As many flights as I've been on, the view from the window has never been so beautiful as when we were flying over the Southwest. Through clear skies, we overflew dramatic canyons. Even from 34,000 feet, the canyon walls looked deep and steep, colored in orange and brown hues. The area seemed so desolate, almost alien. It was more like flying over Mars than the U.S. Suddenly, abruptly, little groupings of teeny houses began to appear, followed quickly by roads and highways, and then reality. The next day, as Jan headed off for her training, I left the airport and took a couple of buses to Santa Monica, about 10 miles north. I walked along the road overlooking the beach and the Pacific Ocean. The pier was impressive, but it was early and nothing was happening. I walked around the shops and through the mall for about an hour and then headed back to the hotel. The next day, I made my way to the Getty Museum. It was magnificent. It had been open only about 2 years. It sits high up on a hill that rises around 600 feet. Because I was early, I roamed the grounds. The structure cost about $1 billion to construct and is built of chipped white stone. I was told by an attendant who I struck up a conversation with that the stone was shipped in from France or somewhere overseas. His story. There is hardly a place around the entire perimeter that doesn't provide a great view of the surrounding area. I spent the next 3.5 hours taking in various pieces of art, painting, sculpture, ceramics, historical artifacts going back to 4,000 to 5,000 BC. I wasn't rushed by anyone and had plenty of time to read the printed material accompanying each work. This alone made the trip to LA worthwhile. January 15th, busy day. We took the grand tour that started out at Marina del Rey. It cost about $100 for the both of us. From the marina, we headed up through the hippie-ish Venice beach area where we stopped for a few minutes. We left Venice and passed through Santa Rosa, a more upscale community. Jan got to see the pier that I saw a few days ago. From there, we turned inland and headed toward the Beverly Hills in the Hollywood area. Jan was able to catch a view of the billion-dollar Getty Museum that I enjoyed so much. The tour guide mentioned that a 13-year battle had been fought between the builders and the community over the architecture. We toured the residential areas and caught quick glimpses of homes belonging to a variety of stars and celebrities. We stopped at Mann's Chinese Theater, where many stars imprinted their hands and feet and signed their names, and some added little notes. I found this much more interesting and personal than the newer printed stars placed in the sidewalk around the theater area. The modern procedure for having one's name placed on the walkway of stars was interesting. A committee has to invite a celebrity, then they have to write some sort of acceptance and pay some $15,000 to the city. The following day, we took a tour to Long Beach to see the Queen Mary. From the outside, it looked quite impressive, but the inside was rather disappointing. It had not been well maintained, and there were too many retail shops on board. In mid-February, before actually going to Boston University's Center for Anxiety, I had a 15-minute telephone interview.